Before we jump into our conversation on writing and reading, I just want to thank my new subscribers. I want to thank Christopher and Gregory and Megan for becoming paid subscribers to Inner Immigrate. You guys literally make me so happy and you keep me going. So thank you. And if you guys haven't subscribed already, just go to annakeating.substack.com. Domenica, okay, maybe you could introduce yourself in case some people don't know you, kind of what you do for work, and also just what you do that gives you joy. Maybe they're the same thing.
Yeah. So I'm Domenica Ruta. I am an author. I have three books that I have written, and another book that is an anthology that I co-edited and have a piece in. My first book was With or Without You, which is a memoir, came out in 2013, which feels a really long time ago. But I'm primarily a fiction writer, so my most recent two books are not both novels. And I publish short fiction for pennies and tiny little publications. And I occasionally write book reviews for the New York Times, and I teach creative writing at Sarah Lawrence College. And I occasionally do, writing consulting work. And these are all things, the freelance things I do to pay the bills. And for joy, um, I've been really, really enjoying this phase of my life of all the friends in midlife who are sort of like, oh, we don't have to be chained to our families 24/7. All of my friends are getting much more social. Maybe it's
Yes.
a post-pandemic thing, but it sounds so cheesy, but I've been getting so much joy from hanging out with friends in that way that we used to when we were teenagers, when you
Yeah.
really just like hang out for the sake of hanging out. And that's been really fun. And I'm also a little bit of a witch. And so I do a lot of tarot reading, which I do only for free. I don't believe you should charge money for it. So I've been doing, that's another thing I do with a lot of joy is
Oh,
reading
I
tarot for friends and family.
I love all of that. I feel like we should be friends. I want you to read my tarot.
I
And
would love to anytime.
I also love the midlife thing that is maybe a cliche but true of being like the girl you always were and just loving her this time and
Yep.
and like
No, Instagram has fed that to me too. And I was like, you clocked me and you're right. And it's happening
correct.
to all of my friends. We're all
Yeah.
getting very weird and very social in this way that we haven't been since our teen years.
I love it. I love it. You're going to come hang out in my garden. It's going to happen.
Okay.
I'm manifesting this.
Yeah.
Your writing is freakishly good. It's very honest. It's sometimes heartbreaking. I found you because I read your piece about domestic violence on your Substack and Lindy West's memoir. And there were so many pieces about Lindy West's memoir, and yours was by far the best. So I just want to really say that Domenica has such an interesting voice because she's that rare thing of somebody who knows what she's talking about. You come from a working class background. You have experience working on a domestic violence hotline. So I just wanted to say that that's how I found you, and I'm really thankful for your work. Um, one second. I don't know what happened. I'm finding you again. Okay, sorry about that. So it led me to this book, your first book, With or Without You. And I just wanted to ask you how you decided to write it, how you knew you had to write it.
Yeah, I was in graduate school. I was in an MFA program, and I was a fiction writer. And we didn't even have a nonfiction concentration. It was fiction, poetry, screenwriting, playwriting. So nonfiction wasn't an option. I had internalized a lot of misogynistic messages about who writes a memoir, and spoiler alert, it's women. And I was very much a product of that millennial era of like, well, I'm better than that. I don't write women's books. What? I'm writing a man's book. And so I was trying to write this fiction that men would take seriously, which is like selling your soul and burying all of the beautiful past selves that led you to become the artist that you are. And whenever a bit of my real voice and my real self would come out in my fiction, people would say, oh, this part's totally unbelievable. This would never happen. And it was always something directly from my life. It would be a line of dialogue that was seared into my brain, usually from my mom or between my mom and me, or something like that. And it was so confounding. Like, this is the part that's actually comes from, not from my imagination. And people would always zero in on those details and pick them apart and criticize them as though they were unbelievable. And one of my favorite criticisms were working class poor people don't talk like this. And I
Mm.
was like, okay, like your parents were both college professors. And so what
Yeah.
makes you an authority on that? And but there's a lot of that kind of posturing in the MFA world and in publishing of who gets to be the voice of a disenfranchised community, who gets to be the voice of the working class, and JD Vance's memoir is the perfect example. It's, a pack of lies, but he became the voice of Appalachia, and come to find out like none of that's real. But anyway, so at sort of the end, the ninth inning of my MFA career, I started writing a story about my stepdad that became almost identical to the chapter in the book about my stepdad. It was the first thing I had written about my life that was truly honest. And I just did it just for myself. I didn't submit it to anybody. I didn't let anyone read it. I wasn't in a workshop that I could submit it to. I just wrote it to see like what would happen if I did that. And then I sort of put it away and kept trying to work on a novel that I couldn't make work. And then eventually I crashed out, as the kids say, and in a lot of ways. I finally had to confront that I was an alcoholic and I needed to get sober. A lot of things in my life had to change. And when I came back to my writing practice, the only thing I could write was this memoir. And I wrote it not really knowing like the architecture of a memoir. I just knew I had a bunch of different stories. And what if I just wrote each of those stories and then figured out later how to connect them? And that's how this first book was born.
I love it. I mean, you talk about that in the book as well, that the truth is stranger than fiction, that you're using lines from your actual life and people are saying, folks don't talk like that. I mean, your book is very funny. You would describe a family relative as she's the kind of person who would hit babies.
Yeah.
And I laughed out loud, it kind of reminds me of like Isabel Allende or something when she wrote House of the Spirits. She really
Yes.
did have an aunt who was a clairvoyant.
Yeah.
But it had to be called magical realism for
Right.
a Western audience,
Right. But like she wasn't making that up. Yeah. It's so right. And and I think like when you really, really connect to reality as deeply as you can, it doubles into it, like just twists over into magic. Like I just think that's a real thing. So.
Yeah, and I also love what you're saying about people thinking that memoir is lesser because it is read often and written often by women.
Yeah.
I had a publisher say to me, "Are you okay with writing a book for women?" And it's just such a funny thing to say.
It's so twisted. It's so sick. Like, okay, number one, what an honor.
Yes.
What an honor to write something that women connect with, that lifts their spirits, that makes them feel seen, that makes them feel less alone, that makes them laugh, that makes them access a feel. Like, what an honor and a privilege to be able to do that. And also economically, that's who's buying books. It's women. And I don't know when they're going to figure out like anyway.
When are we going to figure out that being a woman is not a put down? I don't know. We're still in the basics here.
Yeah.
I love your book because you realize even as a child that you were a writer, but you didn't grow up in a home full of books. Like you said, your parents weren't college professors.
No.
There's a scene where you're looking for a book to press flowers and you're having trouble even finding a book in your home.
Yeah.
So how did you know you were a writer when you didn't grow up around a lot of books?
Well, I didn't quite know I was a writer. It's sort of like I couldn't put the two and two together, for a long time. I just know another sort of story about my, misspent graduate school years. I remember turning in my thesis and I had two thesis readers and one of them was a man, one of them was a woman. And the man just had nothing to say that was helpful. Like he clearly didn't take me seriously as a writer whatsoever. And he'd said, "Oh, here's my parting advice. It's a really good idea to keep a little notebook in your pocket in case you have an idea to jot it down." And I looked at this man and I was like, I somehow figured out to do that in junior high school. Yeah. Like I just, at some point, at a very young age, I realized, I have all these ideas and I need to write them down. But I don't want to carry around a big thing. So I had a little notebook with me at all times and a pen, and, I didn't know about Joan Didion's essay on keeping a notebook. I'd never heard of Joan Didion, and it was just like this unbelievably condescending advice that this man thought was like going to blow my mind at this stage in my career. Like, bro, what? Like, how do you think I made it here without figuring that out? And so, yeah, I think I always had a writing practice before I knew what to call it that. And certainly before I knew to call myself a writer. I remember reading this, I think it was Toni Morrison's interview in the Paris Review, or some interview with Toni Morrison, about how she wouldn't put writer on her taxes until she'd made a certain amount of money from writing. At some point, I mean, she was Toni Morrison. Like, she came out the gate a such a powerful voice that changed American literature forever. She's a once in a generation writer. But even Toni Morrison didn't realize she was Toni Morrison. And one of her friends had to be like, hey, Toni, it's okay to put writer on your taxes now. And I think like she'd had a couple of, you think of the Bluest Eye, what an incredible book that was. And that was her first book, and she still was like, I don't know if I can call myself a writer. And anyway, and so, it took me, it wasn't until I could put on my taxes that I would, that I like the After With or Without You, probably the one and only time that, I made enough money to be like, this is my primary income. And I put on my taxes. I was like, okay, I guess I'm a writer. I can say that now. It felt really, growing up working class, uneducated, it felt like a silly thing to say until I had that, structural validation.
That's so funny. What kind of fears did you have to face in order to write your memoir? Or did you just kind of write it in a fugue state and then face those fears later?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say fugue state, but like there was definitely like lots of terror, but I just made a commitment to myself. I was like, I'm putting all of these fears into a box to be opened later. I should be so lucky as to have the problem of actually having to face these fears, because having to face these fears means this book is actually going to go out into the world.
That's right.
And so
right.
like, and to my students, I always, they are very, like, even in workshop, and I'm like, it's like, this is a small, intimate, very safe environment. Your parents aren't going to read this. Your exes aren't going to read this. You know what I mean? Like, your friends aren't going to read this. Like, you can change your names and we'll never find these people. Even with social media sleuthing, you can go there and they're still really scared. And I always tell them, you need to write a first draft as though it's 100 years in the future and you're dead. And if you have children, they're dead. And if they have children, they're like, it's like many generations of people connected to you are gone. And like, you're completely safe to tell the truth because you're not going to hurt anybody. And just see what that is. And then you can make a lot of choices after you have that initial document. Because I think that's the only way to really free yourself to say things that you can pick and choose later what to publish, but to say those certain things.
Right. Especially as a woman and as a mother and writing about your own mother, all of those relationships are complicated and will be picked apart. Mm-hmm. I have to admit, like, after I became a mom, I feel like my brain kind of broke. I'm hypersensitive to like the suffering of children. And the first couple chapters of your book were really challenging for me to read because you experienced kind of every kind of abuse and neglect, also love, but a lot of abuse and neglect in your childhood. But I'm really glad I hung in with it because it's a story of death and rebirth, and it's worth it. What was kind of the hardest scene for you to write? I mean, if you could name a few.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Funny enough, writing about my grandmother was really hard because I loved her so much and the pressure was so high internally to get her right. And like, she was sort of like, as complicated as she was an imperfect person. She was, in many ways, she was sacred to me, and then, it's funny, like, and I would cry a lot when I was working on, like, just, there was so much stuff I detached, and I was occupying only the intellectual part of my brain. And it was all about finding the right nouns and verbs, the right cadences, the right rhythms, the right structures, the right sentence structures, long, short, rhythm, all that kind of stuff. But writing about my grandmother was really hard because I would just start crying. And that didn't happen in a lot of other, even more highly charged parts. And so, and to this day, I tried once to read something from that section because I was like, oh, this will be, and I started to tear up and I couldn't do it. And so I'll never, I can't read about that either. So that was sort of a surprise. That was a surprise. And that was really hard. Other parts, about more graphic abuse, I made the choice not to get really graphic because I think every survivor has to make that choice for themselves. You know, I don't think you owe anybody your blood and guts, and a lot of people will sort of demand that from you. And I was really lucky to have an editor who did not demand that from me. There was a lot of respect. Some people need to get into the blood and guts. That is essential to their storytelling voice and to the story they're going to tell. Some people, it was too triggering. It's so triggering for me when I read that stuff. I respect that it has a right to be out there in the world, and I want it to be out there in the world for all who need it. But I have a hard time with it. And I was like, I don't want to do that to somebody. I don't want to do that to a reader. What I wouldn't do to myself. And so, you know, the more graphic abuse, I wrote with a lot more detachment. And so it was hard to write, yes, but not as hard as stuff that was sort of more emotionally molten for me, like my grandmother.
Yeah, I love that. I love your grandmother character in the book. She's really funny.
Yeah.
You write about addiction. Your mom as a kid was addicted to Oxy,
Mm-hmm.
and she would give you a line of Oxy as like self-care, you know. I'm just kidding. So you lived in a house where people were actively in addiction,
Mm-hmm.
and then you later in life realized that you were an alcoholic.
Mm-hmm.
And you write about not drinking. You write, I resorted to prayer as often as I drank around the clock all day.
Mm.
What role did kind of prayer or spirituality have in your finally getting sober?
Yeah, I have a pretty secular, agnostic, but nevertheless deeply spiritual practice. You know, and it's been, you know, I've been sober 17 years, and what that looks like and feels like has changed a million times in that course of that. But you know, prayer can be intransitive. It can be to no one.
Yeah.
It can just be here. Prayers are poems, and poems are prayers, you know, and anyone who said a prayer has written a poem. And what it is, it's just like, here's a small truth that needs to take this form. And it takes this small compressed form.
Yeah.
You know, and because that is what the body and the mind and the spirit is able to tolerate, you know, and it can be a hope, it can be a regret, it can be pain, it can be soothing, it could, you know, whatever it is. But I pray in some form every day.
Yeah.
Who am I praying to? I don't know. Maybe nobody. I truly, I'm like very happily agnostic. I'm like, I don't know, you know, like maybe someone, maybe no one. Lately I've been trying to connect to my ancestors,
Yeah.
particularly like the women and the femmes and the non-binary ones, like who had to deal with like life before, like childbirth before epidurals, you know, like life before birth control, life before no fault divorce, you know, like, you know, just the women in my family who survived really, really, really ungodly living conditions and made it far enough to create me, you know, to get to me. And that they must have had an amazing sense of humor, because no one makes it through all that without being either really, really creative or really, really funny, preferably both. And trying to connect to that, you know, because that's something real and tangible. Like that is DNA that goes back tens of thousands of years. And so I just try to connect with them and be like, hey, thanks.
Yeah.
Really appreciate everything you lived through. And here I am.
Yes, absolutely. I love thinking about like my ancestors who, like, I don't know, crossed the prairie in a covered wagon with nothing and had an abusive husband and were trying to grow flowers. And it's just kind of that sense of womanhood and solidarity and not being alone.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's funny because we put these labels on things like agnostic, but I think a lot of people who would call themselves religious are agnostic. Or
Yeah.
like when I first learned about ancestor work, I was like, oh, that's what Catholics do. You talk to dead people, basically. Like I
Yeah.
do that too.
Yeah. I
Just
mean,
to
I think
like
so.
help me,
Yeah.
like, you know, give me
Yeah.
your strength. And that's what stories do so much, is they connect us to other people so that we feel less
Mm-hmm.
alone. And your book definitely did that for me, because everybody, no matter what, has complicated relationships probably with their mother and their
Mm-hmm.
parents.
Yeah.
Even if you had great parents, it's
Yeah.
never always so
Yeah.
easy. You know?
Yeah.
We're all kind of figuring out how to do this life thing. It's funny that you brought up JD Vance. So your memoir came out in 2013. I don't know, when did Hillbilly Elegy come out?
I feel like soon after.
Yeah.
It was
we
it was
might,
it was in the 20 teens. Like I'm pretty
yeah,
sure. Yeah.
and you might be put on the same shelf. Working class, grew up in families with alcoholism and
Yeah. Yeah.
addiction,
Right.
kind
Yeah.
of left behind towns. But obviously, you guys went in very different directions.
Yeah.
He chose supervillain. You chose novelist.
Yeah. Yeah.
But like maybe you could, I don't know, this might be too political and you can totally say pass, but maybe you could speak to kind of the folks who voted for Trump the first time, who came from those kind of communities. Like, what is the appeal? Because that kind of seems like the town that people in the New York Times write about that they didn't
Right.
actually live in. You
Yes,
know what I mean?
exactly, exactly. Where they do, they might as well go to Iceland. You know what I mean? Like they're like, what is this different culture? And it's like, yo, that's us. That is us. So it needs to be said first and foremost that we are built on a foundation of racist, colonial, rape and pillage and murder, right? And that like everything we have politically is built on that. And that is embedded in every single part of our world. And so what I'm about to say could sound like an excuse if like, and I'm saying, no, it first and foremost, all of that is built on racism. And like if I, as a working class, poor white voter who is like Trump's base, or uneducated white voter, or the, well, increasingly it's people, it's men with, it's men who are not poor at all who are voting.
Yeah, it's changing. Yeah.
And but it's like fundamentally this idea of this racist idea of like this, like if I participate in this system, there's a chance I will do better. And what's important for me to do better is that all these other people don't do better. It's that scarcity mentality that racism thrives in, right? And that and that everything, the whole system was built on that, right? And on top of that, I think we are living in a nation, especially anyone who was raised by the boomer generation, where there is such an insane amount of unhealed trauma that responded to fascism in this really singular and powerful way. I think there are a lot of people, like I think about friends whose parents voted for Trump. And this is microcosm and by no means academic. And, I don't have like spreadsheets I can back this up with. But like I have friends whose parents voted for Trump, and I've known these people since I was very young. And it's just so weird to see them get so fanatical. And then it's like, oh, right, because they have all of this unbelievable unhealed trauma that their kids are now starting to deal with. And as they're confronting it, their hearts are softening and they're realizing more on a deeper level the care a community really needs. And it's basically everything the Republican Party is working against, And so it's not to say that like unhealed trauma is what makes you vote for against your own interests. But I have noticed a lot. It's like there is something about the false sense of security and power that a really mean, angry, stubborn fascist it's security for a lot of people who have not faced that wound inside of them. Racism is definitely the reason, like capitalism is built on racism. And our democracy is built on racism. Like that is the real reason. But I think a thin layer on top is just like generational trauma, like entrenched family trauma. And here comes this really angry guy who's like, that anger feels so much safer than my pain. Yeah. So if I attach to that anger, like I don't have to feel this pain anymore. And then part of that anger is the story of like, it's that guy's, it's trans people's fault, it's immigrants' fault, it's queer people's fault, it's brown and black people's fault. It's, it's like, it's angry feminists' fault. It's like, and then you even more protected from looking within. Right. Which is not to say that if everyone went to therapy, we'd have a better system. It's like, no, it's obviously much more complicated than that. There's deeper levels of like racial reckoning we need to do. But I can't help but think that that's a big part of it.
Yeah, so you're saying two things. I mean, it goes all the way back to the beginning of our history, right? Is that you tell poor whites, like the reason that your life sucks is because of Black people or because of immigrants. Like find a scapegoat, and someone that you can feel better than.
Yeah.
And then the second piece that you're talking about is if you have lived in a dysfunctional, abusive relationship your whole life, it can feel like love. It can feel familiar,
Definitely.
to
Yeah.
have that kind of incredibly mean,
Yeah.
aggressive, take
Yeah.
charge kind of
Yeah.
guy.
Yeah.
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 And so it's like, oh, I know this guy.
Yeah.
I
Yeah. I
dated him.
know.
I
Yeah.
married him.
It's like, why do people marry abusive partners? And it's like, it's seldom like there's all different reasons, but it's very often like you had an abusive parent and
Yeah.
you
It feels
love and
familiar.
abuse are right next to each other.
Yeah. Yeah. And unconditional love can feel boring.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, okay. I'll move off politics because I know it's so depressing. But I did want to hear your take since you come from those communities that are often talked about and from people who didn't live there.
Yeah.
How did you decide to move into fiction? And why is like reading and writing fiction so important in these crazy times that we're living in?
Yeah, I mean, I was always a fiction writer. I was a short story writer. It wasn't until I finished a memoir that I realized I could probably write a novel too. So fiction was always the plan. It's still the plan. My new book I'm working on, which I hope will be my fourth book, is a novel as well. I love fiction. I mean, I think fiction is. I think memoir. I think both memoir and fiction do this, but they do it from different angles. Uh, it's an exercise in empathy. It's like, hey, can you get into the shoes of this other person who is very, very different from you? Whether that's a real person in a memoir telling their real life story, or whether it's a fictional character. It's like, can you sustain a level of care and concern for this person who actually doesn't exist, for like 200 to 300 pages? And it's an amazing escape.
Yeah.
It feels so good to leave this world. And it's so personal. It gets to be so yours because it's a book. You're not watching actors who are embodying these characters. It's just like, it just could be anybody because it's very private and personal to you. And I think there's a delight to that people really crave. That when we have to live outside so much, like on social media, or just the demands of everyday life, of all the chit chat you have to do, and just to be able to go so deep inside and connect with this other world is so great. It's why fantasy is so huge right now. I'm
Yeah.
like, I get it. Like, I haven't read any of the romantasy that's like really big, but but like it's sort of like, yeah, women are imagining having sex with like centaurs because it's preferable to imagining having sex with straight men. And like, I'm like, the escape of it all is like amazing. Who can blame them? Yeah. And it's finding, for me as a reader, and I try to write for people like me who just want all of these things, like make me see something differently, because it's so hard to make myself do that on my own. It's like, I need a guide. And very often that guide is a novelist.
Right. I love that you're saying that reading is an exercise in empathy. It's an escape. It's something that maybe we definitely need more of because empathy is on the decline.
Yeah.
I also think for women, like you mentioned, romance and all these things that are so maligned, but it is so radical for a woman to leave behind the demands of caring for everyone else and to slip into another world where
Yeah.
she's allowed to have an imagination that is a little bit unhinged and perhaps slightly messy and unjudged.
Yeah.
And there aren't many spaces like that for women.
No. I mean, like, sex is so repressed and taboo and weird in American culture. And like the privacy of a book, of a romance novel, is so liberating because it's a place where a person, very often a cis woman, although everybody reads romance. Everybody reads romance. I don't care. They're lying if they say they don't. But yeah, where you get to like be in touch with the erotic in a way that's like super safe. Like I was walking the other day, I was walking to work and it was really early in the morning. I was going to catch the subway and there was a woman waiting at the bus and she was like standing up. It was still kind of like in the morning, still a little bit dark, at the bus stop, holding up her romance novel. Like I was like, it was so unabashedly a romance novel. And I was like, yes, that's right. You get yours. Like you claim your delightful, delicious erotic space right here at the bus stop, right here like at 7 a.m. Like, let's go. Like you're starting your day right, And yeah, like that, to experience joy, pure joy, and like just all of the amazing neurochemicals that are like that just like bubble up when you're or reading something full of like eroticism and joy and love. And
Yeah. Reading is magic because your brain doesn't know the difference between climbing Mount Everest and reading about a really good book where it feels like you're climbing Mount Everest. And so
Mhm.
I just personally find that so magical. And I found that so magical in your work because I just was completely there. So sorry about that. Okay, I'm back. um, and I think it's interesting that your book, you talk about addiction is carnal and real. I want to tell a story speaking about romance. I was staying with these nuns in Uganda when I was teaching there in college, and I found all these Danielle Steele novels in their library. And it was just awesome
That's
because I was like,
awesome.
even nuns are not one thing. They're not
Yeah,
one thing, you
yeah.
know? And all of us are complicated, and books allow you to realize that you're not the only one who feels conflicting desires and is more than one thing. So I want to thank you so much for your work that kind of like lets people explore their complexity and the different parts of themselves, good and bad and in between. You're just an awesome writer. I'm so honored to connect with you. Where can people find you and find your work?
Yeah, you can find me right here on Substack. Every day is like Sunday. It's free. I believe in the cultural commons. I also I like to have no pressure to produce except for when I want to, and so that's why I keep it free. So that way you can take what you like and leave the rest behind. And I can offer what I like and not feel pressure to do more. I'm on Instagram at Domenica Ruta, just my name, and I have 3 books that are you can buy at your local independent bookseller or bookshop.org. If you need to do it online, bookshop.org is great because it goes to a local independent bookstore. And yeah, they're available everywhere.
That's awesome. And is there something you've read recently that wasn't one of your books, but just that you would recommend to people who want to read more, or something that inspired you, like a book you love?
I just finished Crying in H Mart by Michelle Zauner. I'm late to the parade on this, I realized, by like several years. And it was so good. I held it in my arms like a teddy bear at night. Like I wanted to sleep hugging the book. It was so unbelievably gorgeous, and I really loved it. And I think very different from my memoir, but I feel like if you like my memoir, you'll love that. And if you liked that, you'll like mine. Um, so yeah, I feel like she doesn't know me. I don't know her, but I feel like book sisters with her.
Oh, I love that. You guys read Domenica Ruta, read Crying is H Mart. Just read a book. Read a book. Thank
Yeah.
you so much for reading and writing and just for helping us feel less alone. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.